Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. Bloomberg, Trump hush money judge says he'll decide on recusal by next week. This is huge. This is an enormous story, ladies and gentlemen. Not many people are talking about this, but the odds of recusal are tied directly to the financial crisis that we're seeing play out in slow motion. Hit subscribe in a couple of seconds. You will hear analysis on the stock market, the U.S. economy. I'm going to tell you right now that the odds are any judge, not just this judge, will recuse from a Trump case, especially one where it was unconstitutional. You cannot have a court in New York indict and convict Trump of a federal crime when the federal government dropped the case. Literally dropped the case. The hush money was dropped by the FEC. The Department of Justice did not level any criminal indictment against Trump. It was a state, in this case, the state of New York, deciding that Trump committed a federal crime. Just trust us. They didn't even list a specific statute. This is unconstitutional, so the Supreme Court will get involved if indeed the judge doesn't recuse and overturn an unconstitutional guilty verdict, just like they overturned numerous corruption convictions. In 2016, the Virginia governor's corruption conviction was overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court. Your super chat is greatly appreciated, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen. The more that they try to say that Harris is up, and she's technically up by like a tiny fraction of a percent because of these public relations polls, the worse it is for the market and the economy, which is somewhat amusing. Democrats are trying desperately through media to say that Harris will be the next president. The stock market is petrified for a number of reasons, which only increases the chances. I think Trump has a 95% chance of winning. Paul Bartlett, thank you so very much, Paul. To my super chat, thank you. Paul, I can never thank you enough for being so generous. To my viewers in Australia and around the world, thank you. Let's get started, everybody. Hit subscribe.
Action and Committee to Unleash Prosperity co-founder Steve Moore. Steve, good to see you. Obviously, you're an economy guy, but you talk about the economy, you talk about energy. Again, it's impressive that LNG is down at these, historic lows. But again, you have a group in Kamala Harris and Tim Walz that they're at war with American energy, and they're angry that those prices are so low. They want to see them actually go higher.
Yeah, the point of my piece, Sean, this week was exactly that the fuel of the future is really looking like it's natural gas. Yeah. We have an incredible abundance of natural gas in America. We have like 500 years worth of it. When they're doing the drilling for oil and gas, they get a tremendous amount of natural gas. It's also one of the most reliable sources of energy. It's cheap, and it's made in America. And
by the way, Democrats want to ban fracking. I wanted to ban fracking about 7-8 years ago because I was a fool back then. I was also the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post. And the unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. So I was able to leave that very counterintuitive. It's not just counterintuitive. It's foolish. It's a foolish mindset that you get indoctrinated within. And so none of these people believe what they're saying. Even Bernie Sanders doesn't really believe what he's saying. It's embarrassing to me that I wanted to ban fracking because it would double to triple the cost of heating your home in the winter, especially in the coldest states. So why would Democrats want to do that? But I can tell you, having left that, and it really is a cult, they don't think of the economic ramifications or consequences. I didn't think of the financial repercussions of banning fracking because I was indoctrinated in an ideology, a left-leaning liberal or progressive ideology that thought it was moral and just. It's completely immoral if it freezes people in their homes, which is exactly what would take place.
It's clean burning. So I've never understood, Sean, why the left is against a clean burning fuel. I thought they wanted a clean environment, and yet they hate natural gas. They hate all all of the fossil fuels. Both Walz and Kamala Harris have basically endorsed, the net zero policy, which says no fossil fuels whatsoever. Bottom line here is they bet on the wrong horse. I'm betting big time that the future is going to be natural gas because we have so much of it and it's so reliable.
Steve, if you read through their policies, it is frightening, and I don't think you can overstate how devastating a complete ban, excuse me, they outlaw all fossil fuels in 25 years, essentially. Both of them back that.
This is why the great many people within the Democratic Party are hypocrites, and they lie to their constituents all the time, okay? Like I told you, I really thought banning fracking was a good idea. Actually, I didn't give much thought in it years and years back. I thought it was a moral or just thing to do for the environment and for places where the fracking occurs. The problem, however, is that whereas there's a kernel of truth in terms of left-leaning ideology, it is true there's an argument to be made to ban fracking, but the enormous detrimental, the economic disaster would far outweigh, would be completely immoral and unjust and hurt people and hurt the country and overshadow any, argument in favor of banning fracking. So the way Democrats look, or the far left, the way they look at things is this is moral and just, and it's like almost like a religion. And the problem is that it is completely unethical, immoral to freeze people in their homes, which is what would take place if you banned fracking. Okay, essentially what would take place. Basically what would take place. Okay, people wouldn't be able to afford a heating bill. Okay. Then you have the issue of the Green New Deal. AOC, Democrats, the far left love it. Well, then why doesn't Harris run on it? Because it's not feasible, just like single payer, just like banning fracking. These things have an argument. There's an argument to be made, but they don't believe it. These are ways to manipulate and deceive the far left or young voters into voting Democrat. And the usual suspects, the same 3 to 4 million sub channels, the pundits, they always reiterate, this is really important. Democrats will do this. They're simply lying to their constituents, the politicians, the pundits, the journalists. They're lying by omission or overtly lying. They have zero intention of implementing any of the major policies of the Green New Deal, okay? But they'll promise the world. And so whereas they try to say Trump is a con man, no, he's not. He tries his best to implement everything he says he believes in. Pretty much almost everything he says he believes in, all the policies. Democrats believe maybe 20, 25% of the policies that they claim to, want to uphold.
You cannot overstate how devastating that would be to every single American family, the American economy, and our position on the world stage. It is a danger to us financially, but a danger to us literally.
Yeah, so we get maybe 10% of our energy from wind and solar power, and you can use sun power in places like Phoenix, Arizona, and you can use wind power in the plains of Texas. But let's face it. I mean, every rational person knows you're not going to replace today. Sean and Dagan, are you ready for this? 83% of our energy still comes from old-fashioned fossil fuels, and about another 10% of it comes from nuclear power. They're against nuclear power too, and it's amazing to me that they're only in favor of the energy sources that don't work. If the ones that do work and are reliable, they're against.
You can't have those, Steve. You can't have energy sources that work, and we can't have farmers that grow food. Again, weird and crazy policies from the left. Let's move on to this now. The Exodus from major cities run by Democrats, that continues. In a 3-month period, according to a new report, New York City, Boston, San Francisco, LA, Seattle, and Portland all saw massive population declines.
Instead, Americans packing up and moving to places friendlier to their wallets, like Columbus, Ohio, Jacksonville, Florida, and San Antonio, Texas. Is there anything that is going to stop this migration? And it is less, you're seeing it happen to people moving to less expensive places, like places in Ohio, which I can now attest to.
So this trend has been going on for about 25 or 30 years. It's accelerating now, and it's a sad story, actually. It's what progressives do when they take over a city or a state. They destroy it. They contaminate everything they touch because they don't fight crime. They have terrible schools. They raise taxes. They make it unlivable, and people move out. And the thing that's amazing is, even my liberal friends are moving out of these places because they just can't take it anymore.
And the nuttiest thing, the craziest thing is that the wonderful, highly educated, morally superior liberal Democrats leaving New York, California, and other states, they go to Texas, they go to other places, and they bring the politics with them. It's like, if you're leaving a blue state, you're going to a red state. Why are you going to bring your politics with you? You're leaving because the politics didn't work out there. Why ruin a nice red state? I don't get it. I don't get it.
And why is this important in terms of the national story that you guys have been talking about? Because what Kamala Harris wants to do is turn America into San Francisco. I don't want that. I don't want to see that.
By the way, San Francisco was the most beautiful, amazing. I haven't been there in years, but growing up, it was the most beautiful, romantic, amazing, gorgeous city. Food, everything, just the history, the charm. If you look at what's taken place, San Francisco and Oakland, major corporations leaving, crime through the roof, homelessness, illegal substances all over the place, trying to be algorithmically friendly here. But it's like Democrats don't see it. They don't care. They just don't care. I don't understand why they don't care. For people who claim to be morally superior, I don't get how they can't see people going to the bathroom in front of a department store. Maybe that's not a good thing morally, but apparently the morally superior don't care.
But Steve, that's the point, is it? So again, we see more business favorable states get more people. If you're anti-business, you see people leave. That happens around the world as well. You'll see companies leave America and go to climates that have better workforces and better tax policy. And again, it affects the country as a whole. So this is just a microcosm of what happens globally with businesses and jobs.
Yeah, exactly right. One of the fastest growing countries in the world is Ireland. And Ireland, Sean, believe it or not, has the lowest corporate tax rate. Do you think those two things might be related? I do. In fact, a lot of American companies moved out of there. And, when we pass, people don't understand. The reason we cut the corporate tax rate back in 2017, and Larry Kudlow and I and others really advised Trump to do this, was we wanted to make America competitive. We had the highest tax rate in the world, and companies were leaving. And Kamala Harris wants to put us back up at the highest tax rate in the world. That's not going to work. That's not going to create jobs.
What Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the left, what they don't understand is that, okay, I'm not gonna give you the magazine, but it's literally let's say a socialist magazine, left-leaning, socialist, progressive magazine. Okay, I'm not gonna give you the name, but it's one of the few that you can get, at Barnes & Noble, for example. It sells for $14. Okay. Now, it's a pretty big copy. I was looking at it the other day. I'm not going to give you the magazine, but these are the people who don't like capitalism, are publishing a far-left magazine selling for $14. You're going to buy a magazine for $14, okay? So it's like, then you get the far left like streamers on, different platforms, this platform. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions a year, spouting policies that would hurt the average American and claiming to be the far left, the good communist, socialist. You're making a lot of money. You're not giving your money willingly to taxes. It's, well, why would I do that? And they get all indignant. It's like, well, you want everyone else to. Yeah, but then there would be policies where everyone could, well, why don't you then give to charity? Oh, they don't want to do that either. So it's just that side is. They claim that like conservatives are the hypocrites, but it's like, conservatives today are different from conservatives 30 years ago. Nobody really cares in terms of what you do with your life, as long as you try not to change the fabric of society. Other than that, just do what you like in life. Conservatives don't care. The main thing with a modern day conservative, or at least the Trump Republican, is that they don't want wars. Democrats have no problem with endless military quagmires. The moral and just viewpoint, if you're so worried about morality, if you're on the left, the moral and just viewpoint is to vote for Trump, to be against never-ending military conflict, to want to have a great economy like we had with Trump, record low poverty. But the left doesn't seem to care about poverty.
Probably the most noticeable person kind of pushing back on the Assam rule because, well, it's Claudia Assam. She's a chief economist at New Century Advisors. All right, Claudia, we spoke just recently, and it seems everyone now, here's an interesting thing. Everyone's adding their own tidbits to your indicator. Now, I'm not sure if you ever put out an official pamphlet, but people are saying yes, but, no, but. In fact, give you an example. Someone could use the full-time jobs versus part-time jobs, right? That's indicating a potential recession. So what do you need to see to be convinced that recession, we're in it, or it's right around the corner?
A recession is a broad-based contraction economic activity. So I think we need to see more signs of it. I don't think we need to see more signs to have, say, policymakers act like the Federal Reserve. But in terms of like really saying this is a recession, we're not there. The labor market data, and frankly, if it continues to worsen, that is a very negative sign, because a lot of the other measures we have will revise a lot. That very first chart you showed about what it looked like before with the SOM rule and other data, and now, well, that's what the data look like right now for 2001. And like Anna Wong has been very clear about, we have to be careful that particularly in moments where the economy turns, right, it can be really hard to measure it.
And for me also, we not only do we get the rate of change sometimes speeds up on the way down. There's revisions, and we find out what we thought wasn't true. And I want to go back and I actually did go back and read transcripts of this emergency Fed meeting. It was January 3rd, 2001. Greenspan, he argued for an emergency rate cut. And he talked about a lot of things that it seems like this could be the conversation at the Fed right now. And he said, listen, he compared to this comforting feeling that most economists say that we're not there yet. He said it was of a person falling off a 30-story building and still experiencing a state of tranquility 10 floors above the street. So far, so.
Well, number one, you don't need a recession. This is not in response to what you just heard. From the political viewpoint, okay, the bird's eye, the aggregate, the 30,000-foot view of everything, you don't need a recession for a market crash, okay? Market crashes usually cause recessions, but a recession might not be always a precursor to a market crash. The issue with Harris and Trump is the following. Trump's going to win. There's no doubt about it in my mind, because you're seeing a real-time, slow-motion stock market crash. The stock market already crashed, rebounded a little bit, but that's if you look at 1929 or if you look at 2008, the volatility increased right before the major downturn. So they talk about the VIX index, how it goes from 27 to 45 to 50 to back to 27. So all of that volatility is no good. And we have record highs in credit card debt. We have a commercial real estate problem. We have a huge problem with cryptocurrencies and possible Ponzi schemes that will be washed out, will be exposed when the market tanks. And you have an overvalued market with high interest rates and inflation that it keeps going up. So maybe, very likely, the Fed didn't want to lower interest rates because they didn't want inflation to skyrocket.
Good. He went on to say that he was asked, well, is this an emergency cut? Would it be a sort of insurance policy? And he said, yes. Is that the way maybe the Fed should be looking at this now?
Well, the Fed should be watching very carefully what's happening with the data. I think especially with the next employment report will be decisive for what they do in December. A difference between now and back when Greenspan was making those very, he was right on there, is that the markets, they're doing some of that intermediating work for the Fed. Right. When the jobs report came out, we've seen the futures federal funds rate, we've seen some of the interest rates moved up. That's what we need, is to take a little bit of pressure off, right? A sign of a recession, a sign of not even a recession, just weakening that is going past what is necessary to get inflation down. Well, steps should be taken. It doesn't just have to be the Fed cutting rates. It can also be the anticipation of that coming. The Fed does have to then deliver, but they don't have to do it in between. That is a big, break glass.
Right. So no emergency cut for you, but you were saying cut that even before the jobs report, you told me the Fed was behind. So are we now at a point where you want to see, or we need a 50 basis point cut in September?
Given all that we know now, I think a 50 basis point cut would be appropriate. Do I think that's what the Fed is going to do? Not unless they really feel like they have to. Right. They would like to go gradually. And I think.
So then they don't cut rates 50 basis points. Then the market tanks and overreacts. Then they cut rate. If they cut rates 50 basis points, then inflation then goes up. But then maybe there's other issues too. With bonds, the bond market. Okay. That could hurt the bond market as well. So, but see, again, there's been mismanagement for 4 years. I mean, they flooded the country full of strategic petroleum reserves. They had oil and gas associations sue Biden's administration. And then they said within the lawsuits that inflation will increase. And we have high interest rates. It's double. Mortgage rates have doubled since Biden took over, all because of Trump's mean tweets. Okay, it's like, why would you put Trump's personality above your pocketbook? I don't get it. I don't understand it. But this financial advisor, this economist is brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
I think that's, I think the that could be very appropriate. My view is they should have been cutting for a while because the economy it's easing off and it is normalizing. The Fed needs to normalize. So they should be doing some catch up. I think, unfortunately, I think that probably is where they're going to be headed, because I think what we're seeing, even if the SOM rule is overstating its sum, it is picking up on something. And many of these other indicators you showed are picking up on something that is very worrisome.
All right. I only have maybe 20 seconds, so I'll ask a personal question. Now that you're famous everywhere, you're getting free drinks, people opening more doors for you. I mean, how is it to be the ultimate economic celebrity in America right now? I mean, you must be getting a whole bunch of free stuff.
No, this has not been fun. And it's really tough to have. It was never supposed to turn on outside of a recession. I'm not trying to stoke any kind of panic, but there is no fame and fortune in this.
So the mismanagement, like I said, 4 years from now, and the market crashes a lot further. I think it will in the next 3 months, possibly late September, early October, Trump 99.9% victory.
Level since pandemic lockdowns in 2020 as stocks tumble on recession fears. Joining us now is Stephanie Pomboy, Macro Maven's president. Stephanie, great to see you. So I read at its highest level since
So you see this VIX index, it's basically like looking up at the sky and it's like, oh, there's a thunderstorm. And then the next day, oh, clear skies ahead. Then the next day, oh, it's going to rain. Then the next day, a tsunami. Oh my God. So it's like, I don't, I mean, it's only worth looking at it, in hindsight. This is only worth, like the volatility index is only worth, the value is, you can see, okay, let's see how volatile things have been. When it gets this volatile, there's two ways to go. Either market will go way up, but how much further up can it go? It's already overvalued and it's reached all-time highs in a terrible economy. Do the math on that. Or it could go way down. And I think, unfortunately, because I don't want people to lose money, left, right, doesn't matter. I don't want all the millionaire socialists to lose their money. The streamers and everything. They're millionaires, but they're good socialists. We have the wealthiest communists and socialists in America who've ever lived. Well, actually, maybe not. maybe not, because that system of government, there's actually a great deal of wealth at the top, which is the antithesis of what the whole ideology is about. But anyway, let's continue.
Pandemic lockdowns in 2020 as stocks tumble on recession fears.
Jeanette, by the way, thank you, Jeanette. Greatly appreciated. To my super chat, thank you. Thank you again, Jeanette.
Joining us now is Stephanie Pomboy, Macro Maven's president. Stephanie, great to see you. So I read your stuff. You were predicting this week that markets would face some blustery headwinds. How much more bluster should investors be prepared for?
Well, thanks so much for having me, you all. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think, a little perspective is always useful. The market post-COVID is up 150%. And everyone is hysterical now that we're down 7.5% from that high. So we're now back to where we were in May. That's, 2.5 months ago. So just a little perspective. This is really very modest in terms of a correction. And frankly, I think it's long overdue. As you know, I've been saying this for a long time. I think that this idea that we might have a recession is sort of like Biden might have dementia. Really? I mean, who didn't know that the economy might go into a recession when we just went through the most aggressive Fed tightening cycle in history? I mean, faster and more.
The Fed raised the Fed funds rate from like less than 0.5%, less than 0.25% to over 5.25%. in the matter of like a year and a half, something like that. So are you paying more for credit cards? Okay, again, if you're morally superior and you're a wonderful, morally superior liberal Democrat or far left socialist, why do you want to pay more on credit card debt? Why do you want to make it more difficult for yourself to buy a home? I don't get it. You have Biden's administration mismanaged everything, said inflation was temporary. Then they said, oh my God, it's not temporary. Then they raised interest rates through the roof exponentially. And still inflation's like over 4% now. And growing, and getting worse, which I think I think that's the reason the Fed didn't lower interest rates.
More dramatic even than we saw in the 1970s. And we did so in contrast to that period against a backdrop of an economy that's incredibly levered, and the corporate sector especially. The corporate market is twice as levered as it was in 2007. And a much larger portion of that debt is of lower quality. Back in 2007, the share of investment grade paper that was rated BBB or lower, which is sort of just one downgrade from junk, was 37% of the IG market. Today, it's 55%. Wow. So we have lower quality borrowers that are massively levered, that just endure the most rapid tightening cycle. And we're sitting here shocked that maybe some of them are starting to have problems.
I think, Stephanie, a dose of perspective is always good to put it into context. So I appreciate that. But the way I'm looking at this market, I see three factors that are impacting the selling that we're seeing today. The first would be sort of fundamentals, economy, what you're talking about, in general, some of these, leveraged investors that are out there. The second would be the election. And the third would be geopolitics. And so ultimately, we're waiting and watching today to see what Iran will or won't do with respect to Israel. Our understanding is that they will do something. How much does that impact this? How much could it potentially make it worse?
Well, I would add a fourth, Jackie, before I get into the two that you mentioned, and that is the unwind of the yen carry trade. And I think this is a very huge factor that isn't getting nearly enough attention. We saw the Bank of Japan back in March moved to tightening for the first time in decades and really signaled a shot across the bow to all these levered speculators and hedge funds that had been funding their levered positions in cheap and ever cheapening yen. And yet, for some reason, they must have all fashioned themselves sort of Soros versus the Bank of England. Even when the Bank of Japan telegraphed they were going to raise rates, speculators borrowed even more aggressively in yen. And then it wasn't until last week when the BOJ tightened again that they realized, hey, these guys aren't joking. Maybe they're really going to try to push rates higher. And we saw the compounding factor of the yen carry unwind that contribute, I think, a large part to our sell-off. But on the geopolitical risks, I think, obviously, that's unforecastable, but just another cloud of uncertainty over this market. And then finally, I would say that the bigger factor in terms of politics would be domestic and the rising prospect since Kamala's miraculous transformation to this pro-growth, tax-cutting, pro-fracking conservative, apparently, that the markets now see that she actually has a chance to win, and that's been a real drag, I think, as well. So we do have a perfect.
So the more that, media is going to say that Harris is going to be up 2-3 points. You watch. Probably in the next month. Going into, the debate in September, oh my God, they're going to say she won no matter what happens, they didn't want Biden, so they said Biden, oh my God, Biden, and with Clinton, it was Clinton did so well, oh my, you didn't even have to listen to it, it was so amazing. They're going to say she won, the markets are going to be petrified, which will then cause even a greater market crash. Again, you can't unsee the toothpaste is already out of the tube. You can't unsee what you saw. The stock market is at all-time highs. They just realized it could go down 1,000 points. Now, the big investment banks and hedge funds and, big Wall Street players, they've seen the market go down 1,000 points. They've seen the Nikkei go down the worst drop since 1987, something like that. Now things are going slowly back up. But then if it goes down 2,000 points, the Dow, if it goes down 10%, 4,000 points. Okay? So 10% is 4,000 points or whatever, 3,800 points. Okay, if it goes down more than, let's say 20% would be 8,000 points, something. That would be completely insane. I don't want that to take place, actually. I don't want any of this to take place. But it would be directly the fault of Biden's energy policies, his monetary policy, and fiscal policy. Okay? And don't say, well, monetary policy is completely independent. Yellen is literally campaigning for Democrats.
Perfect storm of headwinds.
So that perfect storm of headwinds is leading some, like Jeremy Siegel, the very respected professor of finance over at Wharton, to come out this morning and say that he would like the Fed to do an emergency cut of 75 basis points. Curious, though, in your opinion, if that actually spooks markets more, because that's telling us that the Fed sees something very, very difficult on the horizon that we were not preparing for.
Well, Taylor, I would agree with that immediate reaction that, if they came in, especially if they did a 75 basis point emergency rate cut, I think the markets would sell off materially. I would also note kind of on that score, on Wednesday when Powell gave his press conference, he likely had seen components, not the whole thing, but components of the Friday payroll report. The Fed gets access to those numbers, early. So his hair was not on fire when he came to the podium on Wednesday, and his characterization of the labor market was pretty, mild-mannered. He didn't seem to view it as particularly dramatic and weakening or, too strong. So he was straight down the middle. And when you look at that in the perspective of the market's reaction to that Friday payroll report, you start to wonder if maybe, the Fed really is going to have a slower reaction function. So I'm with you. I don't think they would do an emergency rate cut. But if they did, I think that would be a real negative for the markets.
So like 1929 was a 13% drop in one day. So would be about 4,000 points if my basic math is working. So that's about 4,000 points, okay? That would destroy crypto because you would have crypto Ponzi schemes like Sam Bankman-Fried. And so how many Ponzi schemes within crypto are billions and billions of dollars in, fraudulent transactions? Do you think maybe there's more of those Ponzi schemes out there? Probably. And then you just have the regular Ponzi schemes like Bernie Madoff on Wall Street. But then you have hedge funds, then you have small banks going under because commercial real estate loans aren't paid. You have a whole bunch of problems cascading all at once. It could be an absolute catastrophe. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but I think that something similar, unfortunately, financially. I think the market will crash, crypto will crash. I think the small banks will go under. It'll be unfortunately terrible, but directly tied to Biden and Harris's mismanagement. In terms of the real estate problem, this is very interesting.
ATMAX company, Christine Short, along with Heritage Capital President Paul Schatz. All right, Paul, I'll start with you. I get all the top economists. They come on the show, and every one of them is like the consumer is strong. And it just frustrates me because they always look at aggregate data. And, yeah, the top 25% is strong as hell, but, the bottom 75% are weak and getting weaker. And now it's I tell you what bothers me. It's reflected in some of these things we're seeing, like what Lydia just talked about, but also in policy. When the Fed talks about policy adjustments and things like that.
Look, I heard Nike was a one-off. I heard Starbucks was a one-off. I heard Helen of Troy was idiosyncratic problems. But that's what happened. They all add up, and you've got, I don't know what number it is, the bottom 25, 15, 30, I don't know. We know that credit card delinquencies are up. We know that auto delinquencies are up. The consumer and these stocks like Delta, I think even though they were lagging, they were still priced for perfection with no margin for error. So now, look, you've got the travel and leisure is, I will say, a little under pressure. The consumer brands are a little under pressure. The industrials and material stocks aren't trading so hot either. So clearly, there's something percolating beneath the surface. And I think it's going to bear itself out in the unemployment numbers.
Really? Well, that's what Jay Powell talked about the last 48 hours, that his focus is less on inflation now, and to your point, a shock to the labor system, labor market. Christine, what do you think? I mean, you know about all of this and everything that's going on in this economy. Where do you think the consumer is? Because that obviously is 2/3 of the economy.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the consumer being resilient, right? I don't know if I would say strong, but they were resilient in the face of high inflation. Right now, we're starting to see that wear a bit. It's coming down. We've talked a lot about the dollar stores, and we've seen this as a great benefit to Walmart as consumers trade down, even at the higher end.
And
trade
even
down
Costco,
to Walmart.
right? They announced a price increase last night, and the stock opened up strong, but they can pull it off. They've got the right business model right for this, right?
Same with Walmart. I mean, a large portion of their business is groceries. That's why you're seeing Walmart favored in this environment and not Target, which is, a peer in the space. And so we are seeing a softening of the consumer. You mentioned jobs. That's the most highly correlated with consumer spending and how willing they are to spend their discretionary income is how secure they feel in their jobs. We saw unemployment tick up, last week when we had jobs reported on Friday. Non-farm payrolls did come in stronger than expected, but they fell over the prior month. And so you're starting to see a softening in the labor market. It's taking longer for people to find jobs. And so because of that, they're pulling back a little bit with their spending.
They didn't fall. They were revised. They were down in the first place, and they're probably going to be lower than we thought they were. And by the way, only 136,000 private sector jobs. And this is what bothers me and I'm concerned about with the Federal Reserve. And I'll bring it back up because, listen, all eyes are always on Jay Powell. Where are you with respect to when do you think they should start cutting?
Should or will, two different things. The whites of the eyes, so first of all, I think Powell did a great job this week, and I'm no fan of the Fed. I've been critical of Jay and his predecessors.
He was kind of swatting them away this week.
I think he did a really good job, especially with Warren. I think he did a really good job, and he pushed back when he needed to push back. I think the problem is almost whatever the Fed's going to do now, they've gone too far. It's probably too late. You're right, unemployment's 4%. Once it doesn't go below 4 for a couple of months, the genie's out of the bottle. Maybe we're heading towards zero growth, possibly negative growth. But I think the Fed's I think they will start in September.
So if we have 2 quarters of zero growth, is that a good thing? The Democrats can run on and they say, we're not in a recession, yay! We have zero growth for 2 quarters. It wasn't negative growth like what took place in 2022, which they, of course, then changed the definition. If it was Trump, it would be worse than the market crash in 29. But because it was Democrats in office, you know what? The definition has changed. 2 consecutive negative quarters, that's not a recession.
Should they start in September is a different story, but I think they will start in September.
We're seeing a lot of people are saying, okay, 4.1 is not a big number, but the pace of it's going up. You mentioned it was already a surprise. The pace is, going up a little bit almost every time these reports come out. Where do you see the Fed taking action?
Yeah, I mean, look, the consensus is for September, right? And so I believe after the remarks the last few days that's likely to happen. I think that's where 80% of the probability is. But you're right. Once the momentum starts heading in that direction, it gets hard to stop. And now that we're over 4%, wage growth's come down a bit.
And Powell acknowledged that the last 2 days, too, that they understand, they're not going to wait. They're going to go to where the puck is heading, we hope. All right, I got to ask you about the bank earnings tomorrow because we'll learn more about the consumer and some other things, the economy.
Yeah, so financials are kind of middle of the road overall as a sector. They're expecting to post the 7th highest growth rate. The banks are actually the biggest deterrent of growth within that sector. Right. So the industry itself down 10%. But the big banks, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, they're all expected to do fairly well. It's the investment banks that are actually going to be the big winners there.
I tell you what, let's go back to Lydia because she's going to sort of get a more granular look on this for us. Lydia.
Yeah, more to what you were just talking about. We've really kind of seen a tough year for the regional banks, differing the course, of course, from some of the larger banks. You can see they started off here, similar path, but then the big banks really took off, leaving the regional banks kind of in the dust here. So we're going to see soon whether these big moves from the behemoths are justified when we start to see earnings posted from many of these big banks, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, coming tomorrow before the bell. That's also going to give us a chance to see how this environment, this higher for longer interest rate, impacting the banking system. And of course, we're going to be looking for signs of how the consumer is
in our approach to, we don't change anything in our approach to address other factors like the political calendar. I'll say this too. We never use our tools to support or oppose a political party, a politician, or any political outcome. This is my 4th presidential election at the
Yeah, you do.
Fed. I can tell you this is how we think about it. This is what we do. So anything that we do before, during, or after the election will be based on the data, the outlook, and the balance of risks.
All
All right, there you go. Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell insisting that politics play no part in monetary policy decisions. The central bank holding interest rates steady yesterday for the 8th straight meeting, opening the door to a September rate cut right before the presidential election. Joining me now is former Soros Fund Management Chief Investment Officer, Key Square Capital Management CEO and founder, Scott Bessent. Scott, great to see you.
Good to be with you, Marianne.
Your reaction to what you just heard from Jay Powell?
Well, look, the Fed's always political. 93% registered Democrats. Jay Powell's been political for his entire tenure, and he's saying he's not going to be political now. I think if he wanted to not be political, he would indicate that there could be rate cuts after the election when President Trump wins. He hasn't committed to that. But I think importantly, they've backed themselves into a corner here with this unstable equilibrium they've gotten the economy into. They got to keep the stock market and real estate market up through the election, because it's the upper end of Americans who are powering the economy, because the bottom 50%, as you and I have talked about, are getting crushed.
And you think they're doing that how? I mean, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve or Janet Yellen with the auctions, how are they keeping the economy propped up, as you say, going into the election?
Well, it's the forward guidance on the rate cuts. We saw what the stock market did yesterday. Yeah, that's right. And then, Janet Yellen changing the QRA. I would tell all your viewers to watch bipartisan 30-page paper by Stephen Mayer and Nouriel Roubini, Hudson Capital, explains exactly what Janet Yellen did. She and her lieutenants got caught with their hand in the cookie jar.
Wow.
Manipulating Treasury issuance. They, in essence, have taken over the Fed.
That's unbelievable. I want to get your take on the race where it stands, because former President Trump is slamming the Biden-Harris administration for the high inflation that we've seen because of all of the spending. The impact to the black community he spoke about yesterday. He spoke about immigration and inflation in front of the black community yesterday, the National Association of Black Journalists convention in Chicago. Here's a bit of it. Watch.
The inflation is absolutely destroying our middle class, our working class, virtually every class. Inflation is a disaster in our country. Young people, young black people, they don't have the American dream anymore. They can't buy a house. They can't borrow the money because of the cost of the money. They can't buy it because of the cost of housing, because of the cost to build it, because of inflation. Inflation is a disaster, and it's destroying our country, and it's destroying the black community probably as much.
So this is the crux of this race, inflation. I mean, this is, most people don't know the ins and outs of an election and sort of, what's going on behind the scenes, but they know how much ground beef costs them, eggs cost them, bread costs, and they are sick of it. Kamala Harris is distancing herself from all of it. You say that the vice president owns President Biden's economy and she'll keep it going. Explain.
Well, if, as we saw from the debate, President Biden has not been running things, for the past, who knows whether it's months or years. So it could only have been the vice president who was in charge. And let's go back.
Look at this again, ladies and gentlemen. 1.4%, okay, in January of 21. 1.4%. And then Biden said, hey, man, you gave me 8% inflation, 9%. It's like, no, that was a lie. But they don't recoil in indignation when Democrats lie. It's only a fact check with Trump. And so Biden, of course, lied about that. And they say Trump lies. Trump's greatest lies are nothing compared to, what did Trump lie about? I still haven't seen a list that's noteworthy. CNN compiled a list, and they were all crowd size. He lied about crowd size. Well, what's more important, lying about inflation or crowd size? They say, oh, he lied about, his last year. No, he didn't. Democrats, Andrew Cuomo, Pelosi, they all made the same statements early on. Actually, far more cavalier statements. But let's continue.
The Vice President Harris was the deciding vote for the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes, that's right.
So she owns those. They would not have passed. It was 50-50. She broke the tie.
Yes, she did.
Those caused the great inflation. She was the border czar. that immigration, so, I've talked about interest rates, inflation, and immigration are the things killing working class America. Tell me which one of those she doesn't own.
Yeah, well, she's walking away from all of it, by the way, Scott. You know that. She was never the border czar. Now, I think that when Joe Biden first named her border czar, she didn't really want it. And I think she probably said to him, I don't want this, but he gave.
The Biden administration finally agreed to ban.
Stuck it to her, so she was forced to go to Texas one day. She didn't actually go to where the crossings are, but she did go to. She claimed she went to the border once.
Well, look, she's been in favor of these mass immigration policies. She's in favor of the Californication of the U.S. economy, which is just spin, spin, spin. Record numbers of people leaving California, going to other states.
Right.
I don't think we want the United States to be like California.
Let me get your take on Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She campaigned for Harris in Philadelphia, and they were with Pennsylvania Governor, a possible VP pick, Josh Shapiro, which you heard that name on this program first. It could very well be the running mate of Kamala, Josh Shapiro, or Mark Kelly from Arizona. Watch this.
Vice President Harris has indicated her support for avoiding tax increases for middle-income families. She's played an important role in determining our economic policy.
Could you imagine Yellen saying anything nice about Trump? How about it? That would never happen.
And general approach to tax fairness over the last 3.5 years.
Wow. It really is disheartening to see Janet Yellen go stump for somebody.
Paul Bartlett, thank you so very much, Paul, as always, for your generosity. Thank you, sir.
She's the Treasury Secretary.
Well, Maria, she's gone from technocrat to apparatchik, and she may or may not be in violation.
Paul Bartlett again, my goodness, thank you so much for your super chat. Thank you, Paul, as always. Thank you. Thank you, Paul Bartlett, and to my viewers to super chat, thank you. Thanks again, Paul.
Of the Hatch Act, she's using her position to campaign, and that on the Secretary Yellen, she forgets she's not Professor Yellen anymore.
No.
2, she has manipulated the Treasury issuance. She goosed financial conditions, which I think have actually hurt the Democrats because it's the in the Biden-Harris America, you either have assets or you have debt.
Yeah.
And as President Trump was telling his audience yesterday, for historical reasons, Black Americans have fewer assets, and they're getting crushed. And then 3, back to the 3 I's: inflation, immigration, and interest rates.
Right.
And it makes me sad. It makes me sad to see that the Biden administration, while yelling that Donald Trump is going to break all the norms, it is not normal for a Treasury Secretary to be out in the campaign trail. It is not normal for a Treasury Secretary to give a speech like she did in Arizona talking about the threat to democracy. It is not normal for the President of the United States and now the Vice President and the Democratic nominee, or soon-to-be Democratic nominee, to talk about rejiggering the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, the rule of law is what attracts people into the U.S. You want to talk about a dollar collapse or a problem in our markets, start messing around with the rule of law like they're doing in Venezuela and see what happens.
Well, it's a great point that you make. And I think at this point, it's politics all the time in this White House, and they're all pulling for Kamala Harris. But we really need to hear more of an agenda from Harris because, all we have is a record in the Biden-Harris administration, and it's not good when it comes to the economy. Now, you just mentioned the markets. What do you think rest of the year? Has there been a Trump trade in place? Because Nate Silver still says that Trump has the edge, although she's taken away some of his lead as she has, she's gotten the enthusiasm up in the Democrat.
Well, I think it's pure public relations. Kamala Harris is actually up in a Real Clear Politics average of polls, but that's public relations. There was like an 8 point. She was up by like 8 or 9 in one poll. Like, what? This is a politician who didn't even make the Democratic primary. Kamala Harris wasn't popular enough within the Democratic Party to make a primary that, of course, is meaningless since Biden actually won delegates and then they took it from him. Just like what they did to Biden was like a million times worse than what they did to Bernie Sanders even.
Party.
Yeah, look, the reason we have the Trump trade is because Jerome Powell signaling rate hikes, Janet Yellen messing around with the Treasury issuance, and then the market anchoring onto Donald Trump winning November 5th. I think probably the reason we got the wobble in the market the past couple of weeks is post the
debate, post Kamala coming in.
Yeah, or post the Republican convention, then when we got the putsch and the Democratic Party replaced Joe Biden, Kamala Harris has gotten a bounce in the polls.
Yes,
and I think as the bounce wanes, then the market will be fine, and we'll see what happens in November.
So you think markets are right here focused on this election?
It's all there is.
Yeah,
it's all there is. And I think what your viewers should also focus on is if the Republicans don't have the trifecta, if there's a Democratic House and the Republicans are not able to get the Tax Cuts and Job Act restated, then it's going to be a mess. It's going to be the biggest tax hike in history, and the Democrats will own that.
At a time that things are actually slowing down.
Things are really slowing
quite a
down.
bit. Yeah,
we're seeing it from small business. We're seeing it for low-end consumers.
Yeah,
and I think that's one of the reasons the Fed's hitting the panic button. It's not inflation.
Yeah.
It's not that they've wound down inflation. The economy is buckling as we speak.
Scott, thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm tying in directly the possible recusal, likely recusal, almost certain recusal if the market completely tanks. But I think that the recusal, the greatest factor in the court or the recusal story is the market. So next week, the judge will decide. It just depends on what happens with the market. I think that we're going to have a serious, serious crash, a terrible market crash before November 5th. That cements Trump's victory, unfortunately, at a great financial cost because of mismanagement by Biden and Harris for 4 years. Hit subscribe, people. Paul Bartlett, thank you, sir, as always. To my super chat, everyone, thank you so much. Jack in Australia, thank you. Thank you so much, Jack. To my viewers in Australia, I cannot thank you enough. And around the world, in the Philippines, around Canada, UK, New Zealand, Nepal, Nigeria, thank you, everybody. Korea, greatly, greatly appreciated. And Japan, thank you so much, everyone. I have viewers around the world. I'm so thankful. I'm so blessed. Jack, thanks so much in Australia. And Paul, thank you so much.